Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, live on Zoom, on Facebook Live, and also on Torah Anytime. Thank you very much for Torah Anytime for hosting this year. And if you want to get some good Torah content, check out TorahAnytime.com. They have an app both for Android and for Apple, so you'll get all great kind of content. Okay. Elliot's disappeared. We're going to bring him back. Here we go. Okay. Vayom Hashem al Avraham. If you have an art scroll, you should be looking at page 54, right at the beginning of the Parasha. Vayom Hashem al Avraham. Hashem says to Avraham, Lech Lecha, go, me'artzecha v'miyalayim me'elatecha, and from your birthplace, from Beis Avicha v'Baal's house, Ela Aretz Asher Areka, to the land that I will show you. So many of the Mefarshim are bothered by this idea, Ela Aretz Asher Areka, to the land that I will show you. What do you mean the land I will show you? Just say to the land of Israel. That's really where Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted Avraham Avinu to go. So if Kodesh Baruch Hu wants Avraham Avinu to go to the land of Israel, say, go from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house to Israel. So Rashi already says there's a lot of interesting discussions exactly why it says to tell him that he didn't know exactly which land it would be, so to make him want to go and to make him for each time he has every time he says etc., he will get extra reward for it. So that's one of the ideas. But I saw a very interesting idea in the Meshech Chochmah today. And the Meshech Chochmah, Rameir Simcha Dvin, says the following. El ha'aretz asher areka means I will show you, but it can mean one of two things. And the Meshech Chochmah takes a very different approach to this. He says, not that I will show you the land, but when you get to this land, I will show you off, basically. If anybody, you've famous joke that they always used to tell about this Yiddish fella that came into a train, and he goes from one compartment to the next. He walks into one compartment and says, excuse me, do you have any grandchildren? Says, yeah. Moves to the next compartment. Says, excuse me, do you have any grandchildren? They said, yeah. Moves to the next one. And somebody sees him. Finally, he opens up one compartment and says, excuse me, do you have any grandchildren? They said, no. Says, great, I'd like to sit over here. Because I've been watching, you've been walking through the entire train asking everybody if they have grandchildren. And finally, when I don't have grandchildren, you come in to sit with me. Do you have something against people with grandchildren? He says, no, well, the honest truth is I want to tell you about my grandchildren. I want to be at theirs. If I sit with them, they're all going to tell me about what their grandchildren are. You should see what my grandson is like. And this is him. You should see the pictures. That's the kids are we're very proud of our children. We're very proud of our grandchildren. And we like to show them off. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is now saying to Avraham Avinu, I am going to show you off. You're going to become the poster boy. And that's really what Avraham Avinu becomes. He becomes HaKadosh Baruch Hu's poster boy, the one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to show around to the nations of the world and say, you see my fellow Avraham over here? He's the one that I've chosen. And it's interesting, if you have a look later on, in Parashas Vayera, right towards the end of Parashas Vayera, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives Avraham Avinu the test of the Akedah, the test of the binding of Isaac. So he says on page 100, if you wanted to look it up, was after these things, Avram and the God tested Avraham Avinu, and he says, Avram, he says, Avram, and he says, here, behold, I am here. And he says, Kachno, please take as bincha your son, it's Yechitcha, your only one. Asher hafta whom you love is Yitzchak, Valechacha, and go alat Samariyah to land of Moriah, Va'aleu Sham La'ola, and bring him up there for an Ola, Alachad, Asher Amalecha, on one of the mountains that I will tell you. So what does it mean, Kachno, please take? So Rashi says, no, please, is usually you say please to someone. Phil Mellish is here. You usually say please to someone when you are asking them to do something. So Rashi says, when I say please, what I'm doing with that is I'm asking you something. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I ask you, I'd like you to be able to withstand this test. Because then otherwise, if you don't withstand this test, they will say, well, look, the other ones weren't hard enough. This wasn't a difficult enough test. this was such a difficult test that even Avraham Avinu faltered when he took this test. That is what Rashi says over there. And we can see from that Rashi is really going along with what I was saying before, that God wanted Avraham Avinu to be showing the nations of the world what it's all about to be a servant of God. And God was meant to be showing, Avraham Avinu was meant to be, this is my poster boy. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, when it comes to the Akedah, if I'm going to show you up to all the other nations, they're going to say, look at my child Avraham. Look what he was able to do. If you're only to withstand 9 out of the 10 of the tests, but you cannot withstand the 10th test, then they'll say, oh, you know what? All right, I guess he was better than most of us, but he's not as great as God makes out to be either. And therefore, this Ela Aretz Asher Eka, the land where I will show you, so says God, I want to show you around to others. Not that I want to show the land to you, but I want you to be the one that I'm showing to other people in this land. Okay, so that's the first idea. And then we move on in verse 2. Have a look at verse 2. I will make you to a great nation, and I will bless you. And I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. This is back on page 54 in Parasha Lech Lecha. First page of the Parasha, page 54 in the Art Scroll. So many of the Mefarshim are bothered by this idea when God says, and I will make your name great. Why does Avraham Avinu need to have a great name? Why does Avraham Avinu need to be famous? Lots of people, they like to have fame and fortune because fame and fortune is something that they've always looked up to. I think in our world nowadays, we are a little bit too obsessed with fame and fortune. The reality is fame and fortune are not really everything they're made out to be. You can see lots of famous people and they're not happy necessarily. And you can see lots of wealthy people and they're not happy necessarily. And I've met people that nobody knows and that have very, very little in material sense, and yet they're much, much happier people than some of the famous people that you meet. Some of the famous people that you meet, they're neurotic. Who wants to take away my money, or who wants to take away my fame, or who wants to attack me, and who wants to take care, it's very hard to be famous. Being famous is not an easy thing. So if God is promising Avraham Avinu here that he should become famous, it sounds a very strange promise to be giving to someone like Avraham Avinu, who really probably couldn't care less about fame or fortune. So what does this mean? So I saw yesterday, there was a set of Svarim that was up for sale that I ended up buying, a very good set of Svarim, and in it he brings a Dvar Torah in the name of the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer, Moshe Sofer Schreiber, who was the chief rabbi of Pressburg, one of the biggest communities at the time, and really somebody who was looked up to by the entire Jewish world. He writes the following idea. In last week's Parasha, we find a very different version of Avraham Avinu. The interesting thing is the Torah actually doesn't speak about it, but the Medrash tells us. So the verse, if you turn back, where are we? Page 50. So you turn back 2 pages. So the verse that tells us, Vayomas Haran dies, Apnei Terach Aviv, on the face, or meaning when Terach was alive, Be'etz Malatu Kazdim, in the land of his birth, in the place of called Ur Kazdim, the ancient city of Ur. It's actually interesting if you look. I remember when we were learning history. So the city in those days that was in the same area, the famous city is called Ur. You can look it up, and that's the city of Ur Kazdim that's being referred to over here in the Torah. So Haran dies, but we don't know how Haran dies or why he dies. The Medrash tells us a very interesting story. The Medrash tells us that Avraham Avinu's father, called Terach, was a merchant in idols. He used to sell idols, and the idols that he sold, whatever you want to call the shop, idols are us, or like where we had a B&Q for idols, and you can go inside, you can get all sorts of idols. And one day he asked his son Avraham, "Hey, listen, Abraham, I'm going out to lunch. Can you just watch all the idols for a moment?" So Avraham Avinu says, "Sure, I'll watch all the idols." And what he does is he takes out a big hammer and he smashes all of the idols to smithereens, except for the one big idol in the middle. And he takes the hammer and he puts it in the hand of the big idol in the middle, and he's just sitting there minding his own business. And his father comes home to see the absolute pandemonium that's going on over there in his shop. And he goes, what in the world happened here? To which Avraham Avinu says, Dad, you won't believe it. It was like the craziest thing. One idol started talking to the other one, and one said, I'm the biggest idol around here. And the other one says, you? You're not the biggest idol around here. I'm much bigger than you. And the third one says, you two are nothings and nobodies. I'm the biggest idol around over here. And they all started fighting until that big idol in the corner said, you're all tiny, and I'm going to show you. And the idol picked up the hammer and he smashed every single one of the idols to smithereens. It was a sight to see. It was so scary. I'm glad you came back. And Terach looks at his son Avraham and he says, have you lost your marbles? He goes, what do you mean? He goes, these idols don't talk. They don't walk. They don't have feelings. They don't smash up people with hammers. They're not real. I made them. And Avraham Avinu goes, aha. So why do you worship them? Yeah. I don't know if you've ever had that. You ever had your kids sort of make you feel silly? This is one of those points where your kids have really made you feel like, next. So here we are. We get to this situation where we get to the next over there. And Terach says, well, let's go to Nimrod. Nimrod was the evil emperor at the time, and he was a big idol worshiper, and he considered himself an idol as well. And he throw Avram in front of Nimrod. And they say to Avram, hey, Avram, what do you believe? He says, I believe in one God. You don't believe in idols? No, well, we believe in the fire idol. He says, okay, so the fire is the most powerful idol out there. He goes, yeah. Well, what about water? Water can put out fire. Well, we believe in water. He goes, well, what about the sun? The sun can, the sun can make the water dry out. He goes, all right, we believe in the sun. Well, what about the clouds? The clouds cover up the sun, right? What about the wind? And he was going through with them. I mean, I think at one point or another, they got the point that this wasn't really a conversation. This conversation wasn't really going where they wanted it to go. So Nimrod says instead to Avram, he says, listen, kid, you think you're so clever? All right, I'm going to take you. I'm going to throw you into the fire and let your God save you from my God. My God's the God of fire. Let your God save you. Avram says, look, I don't know if I'll get saved or not, but you can throw him into the fire. That's it. That's what I will do. And they take Avram and they throw him into the fire. And we hear the great miracle that Avram Avinu survives. This is one of Avram Avinu's first tests. He survives being thrown into the fiery furnace. Okay. He comes out. And now they turn to Haran and they say to Haran, hey, whose side are you on, kid? And Haran was waiting to see what would happen with Avraham Avinu. So Haran looks at Avram and he goes, well, he's unscathed. And he went to this big fire furnace. Hey, I'm on his side. So they take Haran, they chuck him in the fire. Ow! And Haran dies. That's the end of Haran. So that's why that's why we read about the story. Haran dies because of Terach. That's what the Medrash tells us. So we have over here a very interesting version of Avram. The version of Avram that we have over here is the version of somebody who is actually quite, what would we say? We would call him a zealot, a kanoi. You would assume that this Avraham Avinu is somebody that you wouldn't want to meet at night. Like this guy, he goes and he smashes up idols and he starts to fight with Nimrod and he has these debates about religion, etc., etc. This seems to be a serious guy. And yet, then we read about Avraham Avinu. We read a new parasha about Avraham Avinu. That part of Avraham Avinu's life, we don't even read about in the Torah. The Medrash tells us about this. Then we have a very different view of Avraham Avinu. We have Avraham Avinu as we see it in Parasha Lech Lecha. In Parasha Lech Lecha, Avraham Avinu says, Parshas Vayera. Next week said Avraham Avinu has just had his bris milah. He's sitting by the door. He's waiting for people to come, and he sees these malachim. He sees these angels that come past, and he doesn't realize they're angels. He goes running after them. He brings them in, and he feeds them, etc., etc. And the Torah tells us, Medrash tells us, Avraham Avinu created an eshel. He created like a hotel. He created an inn, and people would come, and Avraham Avinu would feed them and give them to drink. And then when they said to him, "Listen, my friend, that was really, really kind of you. What do I owe you?" He said, "Oh, nothing." Nothing? How could I owe you nothing for all of that? He goes, because I'm not really in charge. Oh, who's in charge? God's in charge. You owe him thanks for everything they gave you. And he started speaking to people about God, and he converted many, many people converted to monotheism through Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu was a force to be reckoned with. He was a force in Kiruv. The opposite, remember we spoke about that last week with Nimrod, he was the opposite of Nimrod. Noach. Noach couldn't get anyone to change. Avraham Avinu changed thousands of people, and thousands of people took on monotheism because of Avraham Avinu. And now, Avraham has changed his entire modus operandi of being a friendly man, a kiruv guy. Come on in and have some cholent. I'm sure many of you have heard this before. Cholent has brought more people back to Judaism than any debate you could ever have. You can debate from today till tomorrow, and many people know, I'm not debating with you. Come on in, have a l'chaim, have some cholent. We'll talk afterwards. You sit down, you have the cholent, you have the l'chaim, then you can have a conversation. The conversation after cholent is very, very different than the conversation before cholent. I can tell you that. I can guarantee you that. Usually after the cholent, you have a much easier conversation about these kind of things. And so Avraham Avinu invites them in, come sit down, have a cholent, enjoy yourself. We'll talk religion a different time. So what made that change in Avraham Avinu? How come Avraham Avinu changed from being this tough guy to being somebody that's really bringing people close with a very, very different way of doing things? So what Chassam Sofer says is based over here on this verse. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you'll become a blessing. I will make your name great. When you have somebody that's not very famous or that nobody's ever heard of, then oftentimes nobody really gives a lot of credibility to their opinions either. Because why should I take your opinion seriously? Who exactly are you anyway? Right? So you have people, sometimes they write books. So you can have somebody who can write a book about dieting, or you can have somebody who can write a book about exercise. You can have somebody write a book about psychology. And if it's his first book and nobody's ever read the things before that this guy has to say, so somebody's going to walk past and go, interesting. That looks an interesting book. How to Win Friends and Influence People by a guy called Dale Carnegie. You ever heard of the guy? No, never heard of the guy. You? No. All right. Sounds an interesting title. You take it out, you start to read it. Once you start to read it and more people start to read it, and people start to realize, hey, wait a second. This guy is really talking sense. This guy knows what he's saying. So you see another book that's put out by Dale Carnegie. What are you going to end up doing? You'll buy the book. You say, and I read the first book written by Dale Carnegie. It was excellent. I'll buy another one. This guy talks samzach. This guy talks to the point. And the same is true of a lot of authors. The same is true of a lot of famous people. Until they became famous, if they had gotten up and espoused any idea or anything about religion or anything about intellectualism or anything intelligent, people would be, have you heard of this guy before? No. Have you? No, I don't know who he is. So why should anybody listen to what he has to say? But as people become more famous, for whatever reason, famous people's opinions carry more weight. Not because they're necessarily more intelligent. I don't think famous people are necessarily more intelligent. I mean, you just have to look at the past two presidents of the United States, right? Neither of them really inspire that much confidence when you listen to them. Not Trump, not Biden. They don't inspire you into say, wow, we're talking about over here about highly intelligent, Harvard-educated professors that really understand the world. Maybe Biden in his earlier years was a lot more intelligent. He doesn't come across the same way anymore as he used to probably 20 years ago when he started trying to become president. But you got people like Biden, you got people like Trump, and yet the entire world talks about their opinion. Not because their opinion is so clever, not because their opinion is something that nobody else could have. It's because they're famous, because of the president of the United States. So everybody talks about the president of the United States' opinion. The same is true over here. If you have Avraham Avinu, and Avraham Avinu is a nobody, so you know what's going to happen? He's going to have people, they're going to come and say, oh, this guy has an interesting philosophy. You might want to hear what he has to say. Him? Never heard of the guy before. Who is he? Why should I want to know what he has to say? I don't want to hear you walk through town and sometimes you get these guys standing on a street corner and they're sort of shouting away their philosophy. Does anybody ever stop to listen to them? No, people probably stop to listen, to hear a little bit, and then to laugh at them and continue walking. No one wants to hear what the guy has to say. That's why you're standing on Market Street on the street corner screaming, or whether you stand, Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. Nobody really takes people in Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park seriously. So you can stand up and you can yell and you can shout, and maybe 15, 20 people that walk past will listen to you and clap for you when you finish and keep walking. Oh, no, there's a weird guy standing up over here in the middle of a park screaming. So that's Avraham Avinu. How's Avraham Avinu ever going to become a voice to be reckoned with? How's Avraham ever going to become somebody that people actually listen to? Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, V'agadla shemecha. I'm going to make your name great. You will become famous. Not because you need fame and fortune. Avraham Avinu didn't want fame and fortune. What does he need fame and fortune for? He doesn't want to be famous for the point of being famous. He don't want to be rich just to be able to say, look how many millions I have. Avraham Avinu says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if I make you famous, you become a voice to be reckoned with. Your opinions start to become opinions that people discuss seriously. Suddenly people take what you have to say seriously because of who you are. It's like Bill Gates talking about climate change. Why is Bill Gates suddenly somebody can talk about climate change? He's not really, he's not a biologist. He's not a scientist of that sort. He created Microsoft. But because he's famous and he's put himself behind it, so people suddenly listen to what Bill Gates has to say about climate change. So he says, Avraham Avinu, if you want to become somebody to be reckoned with as far as philosophy is concerned, as far as God and monotheism is concerned, if I don't make you famous, nobody's going to listen to what you have to say. Everyone's going to be like, have you heard of this guy standing in the corner talking this rubbish? Yeah. I mean, we all believe in polytheism. This guy thinks there's only one. It's ridiculous. But Avraham Avinu becomes famous, then he becomes somebody to listen to. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him that blessing. And that's why Avraham Avinu changes from last week's Parasha to this week's Parasha. In last week's Parasha, when you're a nothing and when you're a nobody and you want to have your opinion heard, sometimes it takes drastic measures to have your opinion heard. Yeah, have you ever seen people, I don't know, they chain themselves to the motorway. Yeah, they do weird things like that, or they hang on to airplanes as airplanes are trying to take off to stop climate change. So you say, that's a crazy thing to do. Why would anybody do that? The answer is because if I came and said, can I have an appointment maybe with Mr. Boris Johnson to discuss climate change? Who are you? Some kind of student from Nottingham University? No. Who wants to hear what you have to say? Get back to university and get back to where you came from. Nobody takes you seriously. So you have to do that. That's why these people do extreme things. Because otherwise nobody hears what they have to say. If I don't do anything extreme, nobody's going to listen. You never hear famous people doing extreme things. You'll never hear of Bill Gates chaining himself to a motorway to stop climate change, because he can stand up and can give a TED talk, or he can stand up and put out a YouTube video and reach so many more people than some idiot that chains himself to the motorway because he's now famous. So in the early days of Avraham Avinu, says Avrahams Story, the only way for Avraham Avinu to get his point across is to try forcefully to get his point across. After HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him the blessing that I will make you famous, then I don't need to resort to extreme things to get my point across. Actually, all I need to do is to start talking. And that's when Avraham Avinu starts talking. But the change comes because of the fame that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives Avraham Avinu. And in this instance, the fame is not there for Avraham Avinu just to be famous. The fame is to give Avraham Avinu a voice so that people will listen to what he has to say and take it seriously. Okay? One last idea that I want to share with you tonight. Very interesting idea that I saw today brought in the Oznaim Torah by Avrahams Prayer. Avrahams Prayer, now we've turned the page to page 56. There is a famine in the land. So Avraham Avinu has just come to the land of Israel. God has told him, I'm going to take you to a beautiful land, and you show up and it's not really good. There's a famine. Have you ever had this? Like, some of you might have had this, or some people listening, you've hired an Airbnb and you saw all these pictures on the Airbnb website and it looks amazing, it looks phenomenal, and it's this villa in Spain and it's going to have a pool and it all looks great. And then you show up there and the pool is full of cockroaches and the villa looks terrible and it's not been cleaned in 6 months and it smells, etc. And you're like, that's not what the pictures look like. So Avraham Avinu shows up in Israel and he thinks, oh, this is the land that God sent me to, right? Well, this is going to be the great land. Right away, there's a famine. And Avraham Avinu makes his way down to Mitzrayim, Lagursham for a short period of time, because it's very, very difficult. And then Avraham Avinu comes to Mitzrayim and he says to Sarai, you know what? It's very, very precarious situation over here. You're a beautiful woman. The Mitzrayim will see you. They'll see you're his wife and they'll kill me and they'll leave me alive. Tell them that you are my sister. So that they will be good to me because of you. And I will be able to survive because of you. So it's interesting when you look at Rashi, there's always been a Rashi that disturbs me. Rashi says, you know what I'm hoping for? When we go down, people are going to think that you are my sister, and then I'm going to get all sorts of presents. So the question is, number one, Avraham Avinu wants presents. We just said about Avraham Avinu that he's trying to keep away from fame and fortune. That's not his thing. Suddenly he's like, hey, I want presents. And later on, by the way, when we get to the story of the king of Sodom, which is further on in this week's Sedra, the king of Sodom gets saved by Avraham Avinu. He says to Avraham, listen, let's make a deal. You can keep all of the spoils, all of the money, and I'll just keep the people. That's it. I just want my people back. You can have all the money. And he says to the king of Sodom, no. I will take nothing over here. Right? I'm not even taking a stroch nal. I'm not even going to take a shoelace. Below Soma, don't say Ani Ashad is Avraham. You should never say that you were the one that made Avraham wealthy. And the people that are with me, they'll get the money. But but here he's not willing to take money. Here he is willing to take money. So what's going on? So you want money or you don't want money? And why do you want money? What's going on? So Reb Sorotskin actually says a very interesting thing. He says, if you read earlier on, it says Avraham takes, in verse 5, there's a page 54, Avraham takes Sarai, his wife, Lot ben Achiv, Lot his nephew, all of their wealth that they had amassed, and all of the people that they had in Charan. They have all these, these are the souls they made in Charan, i.e., these are all the people that converted to Judaism or that bought into Avraham Avinu's idea of monotheism. And Avraham Avinu has this traveling yeshiva now, and he makes his way with all these groupies with his traveling yeshiva, and he's feeding them and he's taking care of them, etc., etc. So we have over here, it says Avraham Avinu comes with actually, let's call Rechushim. It seems to say that they came with all the wealth they had amassed. So Avraham Avinu wasn't a poor man. So if he wasn't a poor man, why is he suddenly waiting over here for presents from Pharaoh? The whole thing doesn't seem to make sense. Says Rav Sorotskin, he makes it to the land of Israel, the land of Canaan. And there's a famine. And where there's a famine, he starts to dip into his nest egg, into all the money that he has to support his yeshiva and to keep them going. But after a while, he runs out of money. And he says, okay, we have to run out of money. It's very interesting. I'm running out of money. So he says, so what do I do? If I run out of money, what should I do? So he's going to go on a fundraising trip. So he says, let's go to Egypt. Maybe we can go to Egypt. We can make a deal over there. We'll be able to get Yitnuni Matanas. I'll be able to get some money out of Egypt, and I'll be able to keep my whole enterprise going over here. Because if I start to run out of money, all those people that are bought into my ideas and all those people that are bought into the fact that I want to create this yeshiva, you know what's going to happen with them? They're all just going to leave. Because imagine if you were in a yeshiva and you said to Rosh Yeshiva, is there lunch today? No. How about supper? No. How about breakfast tomorrow? No. Why? Hard times. Okay. Can't really stay here on those conditions. I need you to feed me. I can't starve forever. This is not going to work. I don't have parents that are sending me money. I don't have anybody else. You're the one supposed to take care of me. So Avraham Avinu makes his way down to Mitzrayim to start looking Yitnuli Matanas, he says, because that's really what Avraham Avinu needs. He's used up all of his money in support of his people, in support of his yeshiva. And so he's run out of money now. So he says, let's go to Egypt. Let's see what we can do. When he gets there, he says to Sarah Imenu, and maybe I will get presents because of you, and that'll be a wonderful thing. And here he says a beautiful idea. My soul will live because of you. I.e., Avraham Avinu is saying to Sarah Imenu, if I cannot support the people that are here that have learned with me, they will all leave. And if they all leave, I'm worried they will all just go back to their polytheism. They will lose everything that they've gained with me. And if they lose everything they've gained with me, then my soul will never get what it's supposed to get, because I'm hoping to be able to bring these people back to Judaism. I'm hoping to make these people into Jews. If I'm able to get presents, if I'm able to then support my yeshiva again, my soul will be able to live on because of it. If I can't, I'll be stuck. That's what he says. And so it's interesting to see over here. Whereas in the case of the king of Sodom, he didn't have then he had money. He didn't have a yeshiva that he was worrying about. He could support himself. And then the king of Sodom says to him, I'll give you money. He says, I don't need your money. Because in general, Avraham Avinu didn't want anybody else's money, except when it came to supporting his students. He had to support his students. He had to make sure that his people that he is dealing with are fed and will continue to listen to him and will continue to grow in their monotheism and in their belief in God. Unfortunately, that takes money. As much as you think it's easy to have, we can have a rabbi, we can have a yeshiva, and we can have a kollel, etc., etc. All those things need money to run them. People need to be fed, and people need to be able to, you can't just do it without that. You can't just support yourself. So Avraham Avinu did that specifically to be able to support his people. And therefore, that's why Avraham Avinu, as soon as he gets presents, he turns around and he goes back to Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't say the famine finished, but Avraham Avinu says, I have money now. If I have money, I'm able to support my yeshiva again. Let's go back to Eretz Yisrael. I only left Eretz Yisrael because I had to go on a schnorring trip. As soon as my schnorring trip was successful, might as well go back. I have nothing to be looking for over here. But the idea again of Avraham Avinu being the person that constantly was busy trying to bring Jews close to the Judaism, and even the pagans, well, there were no Jews, but trying even then the pagans to convince them of the idea of one God and to believe in only one deity and not in all of this rubbish that goes on all around. And that was what he was willing to risk his life for, and that's what he was willing to go fundraising for, and that's what he was willing. This is Avraham Avinu's mission all the way through. Avraham Avinu wants people to know about this one God, whether it is in the way that he tried to teach his father and to try to teach Nimrod, or whether in the way afterwards by serving cholent and having discussions with people, whatever it is. This is Avraham Avinu's message the whole way through. Yiddishkeit, Yiddishkeit, Yiddishkeit. God, God, one God, and that's what you have to believe in. That's Avraham Avinu's message. That's what he worked for all the time, and that's what he's trying to achieve. So that's the ideas that I wanted to share with you tonight. There's plenty more to share, but I have to get to this engagement that I promised to take my son to. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining me tonight. Thank you for those on Torah anytime. If you want to get in touch, it's davideisenberg@gmail.com. Thank you for those on Facebook Live, and thank you for those who joined us on Zoom, and look forward to seeing you guys next week.